Footsteps echo down empty halls. A cold breath stirs the silent walls. Shadows twist beneath the moonlight. Secrets wait just out of sight. Every heartbeat feels the warning. Night unfolds its ancient warning. In the mist they whisper names, calling out through hollow frames. Lost between the veil and truth, drawn inside the endless ruse.
Boston Harbor, Day 1. The cruise ship Star of the Sea rose from Boston Harbor like a gleaming white skyscraper laid on its side. 14 passenger decks stacked above the water, thousands of windows, glass balconies reflecting the gray Atlantic sky. A floating city designed to carry nearly 4,000 people across the ocean to Bermuda and back in one luxurious week. Dock workers shouted over the gulls circling overhead. Suitcases rolled across gangways. Loudspeakers announced boarding groups. For most of the passengers, this voyage meant cocktails, sun, casinos, and midnight buffets. For 6 of them, the cruise would end in death. Detective Jiggs Williams hated crowds. He stood beside the boarding ramp wearing a Red Sox cap and sunglasses, watching the steady river of tourists flowing into the ship's terminal. Sarah Meechan nudged him with her elbow. "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Profiling everyone." Jiggs shrugged. "Habit." Sarah sighed. "You're on vacation." He looked at the ship. "Statistically speaking, with 4,000 people on board, something bad is bound to happen." Sarah laughed. "You think murder is going to break out on a cruise ship?" He adjusted his cap. "Give it 3 days." Sarah shook her head. "You need therapy." "Probably." They stepped onto the gangway and entered the massive glass atrium of the ship. Neither detective knew that before the cruise ended, they would be hunting a killer through 14 decks of steel corridors. The passengers. Phil Jacobson arrived with an entourage. The 37-year-old tech billionaire moved through the terminal, barking orders into his phone. "No, listen to me," he snapped. "Buy the dip. That's literally what the phrase means." Employees at the reception desk smiled politely as he cased in front of them. Behind him, a tall, elderly man watched quietly. Adward Longstreet, 79, retired Philadelphia homicide detective. He studied Jacobson with the same instincts he had used for decades. Arrogant, impatient, the kind of man who made enemies. A lot of enemies. Longstreet looked away and noticed someone else watching the room. A thin man in wire-rimmed glasses. Calm, observant. Dr. George Williams, psychiatrist. Their eyes met briefly. Neither spoke, but both men instantly recognized something in the other. People who watched. Across the ship in the observation lounge, 74-year-old Millicent Jones sipped champagne beside a panoramic window. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the harbor. She had lived on cruise ships for nearly 10 years. When her wealthy husband died, she sold the mansion, sold the cars, and began living permanently at sea. Most of the crew knew her by name. She knew several passengers already, too. And when she saw one particular man board the ship, her smile vanished. Crew corridors were narrow, metal, and constantly vibrating from the engines. Kenny Alexander, 26-year-old steward, pushed his housekeeping cart down deck 7. He had worked on ships for 2 years. Long hours, good tips, decent rife. Until recently. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked the screen. A message appeared. "You owe us." Another followed. "Last warning." Kenny swallowed hard and shoved the phone away. Meanwhile, on the sun deck, Tanya Jorgen adjusted her sunglasses and surveyed the crowd. 36, attractive, single, and determined. She hadn't booked the cruise for relaxation. She had booked it for marriage hunting. Cruise ships were full of wealthy older men, and she had already spotted several possibilities, including the loud tech billionaire yelling near the pool bar. She smiled. At the sports lounge bar, a large man laughed loudly. Jim Ratt, former football star from Leeds, now 51 and enjoying retirement. He raised a beer with 3 strangers he had met 20 minutes earlier. 7 days of drinking, he laughed. Best vacation ever. The ship's horn blasted. Dock lines released. The Star of the Sea slowly pulled away from Boston Harbor. 7 days.
7 nights, thousands of passengers, and somewhere on board, a killer. That night, the main dining hall glittered with chandeliers and polished silver. Passengers filled hundreds of tables. Jiggs and Sarah sat near the back. Jiggs studied the room automatically. Sarah noticed. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Looking for criminals." "I'm looking for dinner." "Liar." Across the room, Phil Jacobson argued loudly with the waiter. "I said medium rare." "It is medium rare, sir." "This is medium." Nearby diners stared. Sarah sighed. "See, you could arrest him for being annoying." Across the room, Millicent Jones sat quietly watching the dining hall. Her eyes paused on several passengers. Phil Jacobson, George Williams, Edward Longstreet. Then finally, Kenny Alexander. The steward froze when she saw her watching him. Millicent smiled politely, but her eyes held something darker. Chapter 5. The First Night. The Atlantic stretched black and endless around the ship. Wind whipped across the upper decks. Inside, the casino glowed with noise and flashing lights. Jiggs and Sarah sat at the bar. Sarah sipped wine. Jiggs drank bourbon. "Admit it," Sarah said. "Nice vacation." Jiggs nodded. "So far." At that moment, somewhere deep inside the ship, a door quietly closed, and the first move in a carefully planned game began. Near midnight, retired Detective Edward Longstreet walked along deck 12. He couldn't sleep. 35 years in homicide had permanently wired his brain for night patrols. The ocean roared below. He leaned on the railing. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. A shadow moved in the darkness. Longstreet frowned. "Evening," he said. No answer. The shadow stepped closer. Longstreet squinted. "Do I know you?" The figure smiled faintly. "Yes." Something flashed in the moonlight. Longstreet realized what it was too late. Pain exploded in his chest. He stumbled backward. Hands grabbed his jacket. Then, the retired cop disappeared over the railing into the black Atlantic. The ocean swallowed him instantly. No one heard the splash. The next morning, the cruise director made a cheerful announcement. "Good morning, passengers of the Star of the Sea. Today we begin our journey toward beautiful Bermuda." Music played through the speakers. Passengers filled the breakfast buffet. No one yet realized. A man was missing. Jiggs sat with coffee. Sarah read a brochure. "You know what's nice?" she said. "What?" "No murders." Jiggs smiled. "Give it time." Below deck, the captain studied a report from security. A passenger had not returned to his cabin. Edward Longstreet. Last seen late last night. The captain frowned. Overboard incidents were rare, but they happened. He picked up the phone. "Search the ship," he said. Across the ocean, waves rolled endlessly beyond the cruise liner. Far below the surface, Edward Longstreet's body drifted silently in the dark water. The first victim. 5 more to come.
The Atlantic morning looked calm and innocent. Sunlight sparkled across endless blue water as the Star of the Sea cut steadily south toward Bermuda. Passengers filled the upper decks with coffee cups, cameras, and sunscreen. For most of them, it was the first full day of vacation. For the ship's security office, it was already becoming a problem. Captain Henrik Dahl stared at the report in front of him. Still no sign of him? The head of ship security shook his head. Cabin untouched, bed not slept in. Phone left behind. The captain leaned back in his chair. Overboard? Security nodded slowly. It's possible. Witnesses? None. The captain frowned. Name again? Edward Longstreet. The name meant nothing to him. Just another passenger, 79, traveling alone. He rubbed his temple. Overboard incidents were rare but not unheard of. Still, something bothered him. "Run the cameras," he said. Detective Jiggs Williams stood at the buffet staring at a tray of scrambled eggs. Sarah Meacham approached carrying 2 coffees. "You look like you're solving a crime." "I'm deciding between bacon and sausage. Serious business." They sat near a window overlooking the ocean. For 10 minutes they ate quietly. Then Jiggs noticed something. 2 uniformed security officers moving quickly through the dining area. Another speaking to passengers. He watched them. Sarah noticed. "You're doing the thing again." "What thing?" "The cop thing." He nodded toward the officers. "Something's up." Sarah looked. "You think?" One of the officers approached a nearby table. "Excuse me, sir. Have you seen this man?" He showed a phone photo. Jiggs leaned slightly to see it. The face belonged to the elderly man from the boarding terminal, Edward Longstreet. Sarah whispered, "Missing person." Jiggs frowned. "Maybe." An hour later, Jiggs and Sarah were walking along the promenade deck. The ocean wind whipped across the railings. Sarah leaned against the metal railing. "Okay, detective, what's your theory?" Jiggs shrugged.
Old guy disappears first night of cruise? Yeah. Either he jumped, Sarah nodded, or someone helped him. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's dark. Experience. She looked out over the ocean. You really think murder? He shrugged. I think we're on a floating city with 4,000 strangers and no police department. She sighed. Promise me something? What? If someone dies on this cruise? Yes? You're not getting involved. He smiled. No promises. Meanwhile, in the casino lounge, Phil Jacobson was already drunk. It was barely noon. 3 empty glasses sat in front of him. Across the table sat Tanya Jorgen. She had introduced herself 15 minutes earlier. Phil barely remembered how. So you're a tech billionaire, Tanya said with a charming smile. Phil laughed. Self-made. What company? 3 of them. He leaned back proudly. I sold my last startup for $800 million. Tanya's eyes widened. Wow. Phil grinned. You like money? Tanya laughed. Who doesn't? Behind them, another passenger watched quietly. Dr. George Williams, the psychiatrist. Observing. Studying. Analyzing. Just like he studied everyone. Deep in the ship's crew corridors, Kenny Alexander pushed his housekeeping cart. Cabin 7118. Cabin 7119. Cabin 7120. He cleaned quietly. Quickly. Then his phone buzzed again. Another message. You're on the ship now. His stomach dropped. How could they know that? Another message appeared. We know where you are. He shoved the phone back into his pocket. Hands shaking. The second night. That evening, the ship hosted its first formal dinner. Passengers dressed in suits and evening gowns. Music drifted through the grand dining hall. Millicent Jones arrived wearing a black velvet dress. Elegant. Regal. She moved slowly through the room. Several passengers greeted her warmly. She smiled politely. Then she noticed someone across the room. Phil Jacobson. Her eyes hardened. For a moment, pure hatred flashed across her face. Then it vanished. Discovery. The next morning began like the previous one. Sun. Coffee. Ocean. Until cabin 9143 didn't answer housekeeping. Kenny Alexander knocked twice. Housekeeping. No answer. He tried again. Housekeeping. Still nothing. He used the master keycard. The door clicked open. He stepped inside. And immediately froze. The smell hit him first. Metallic. Sharp. His eyes slowly moved toward the bed. A man lay sprawled across the sheets. Blood soaked the pillow. A knife protruded from his chest. Kenny stumbled backward. Oh my God. The dead man was Phil Jacobson. Panic. Within minutes, the hallway filled with security officers. Passengers gathered nearby, whispering. The captain arrived. Then the ship doctor. They confirmed the obvious. Murder. The captain exhaled slowly. A missing passenger the first night. Now a stabbed billionaire. This cruise had just become a nightmare. Jiggs and Sarah were drinking coffee when the announcement came. Attention passengers. Deck 9 corridor temporarily closed for maintenance. Jiggs looked up. Sarah groaned. Maintenance? He shook his head. No. What? Murder. She stared at him. You're guessing. 20 years of homicide. She sighed. Fine. Let's go see. Deck 9 smelled like disinfectant. Security blocked the hallway. Jiggs flashed his badge. The officer blinked. Your police? Massachusetts homicide. Sarah showed hers too. The officer hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside the cabin, the scene was unmistakable. Phil Jacobson lay dead on the bed. Knife in chest. Blood everywhere. Sarah whispered. Jesus. Jiggs studied the room carefully. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. No overturned furniture. Which meant something important. He knew the killer. Jiggs said quietly. The captain met them outside the cabin. Your detectives. Yes. Sarah said. He exhaled. We have no police on board until Bermuda. Jiggs nodded. So we're hid. The captain looked relieved. Can you help us? Jiggs looked back at the cabin, then at the crowded hallway of nervous passengers. Yeah, he said. Looks like our vacation's over. Within hours, the detectives learned something troubling. Several passengers had argued with Phil Jacobson the previous night, including Tanya Jorgen, last person seen drinking with him. Millicent Jones publicly insulted him at dinner. George Williams had a long private conversation with him. Kenny Alexander, steward assigned to his floor. Sarah read the list. That's convenient. Jiggs nodded. Too convenient. She looked up. You think the killer planned this? He looked out, looking out this image. Yeah. Then he added quietly. And I think Longstreet's disappearance wasn't an accident. high above the decks, hidden among the shadows of the ship's upper promenade. Someone watched the investigation begin. Calm, patient. The detectives had noticed the pattern faster than expected. But it didn't matter. Everything was already planned. 7 days, 6 deaths.
The Star of the Sea cut through calm waters, heading toward Bermuda. The sun had barely risen, but the ship's decks were already alive with passengers, oblivious to the terror quietly unfolding below their feet. Detective Jiggs Williams stood near the railing on Deck 11, scanning the horizon. His mind wasn't on the Atlantic or the rising sun. It was on 2 deaths already on his conscience, one of which he hadn't even seen firsthand. Sarah Meechan joined him, coffee in hand. "Any luck with the passenger interviews?" she asked. Jiggs shook his head. Everyone's nervous, everyone's suspicious, and everyone's hiding something. Sarah frowned. "Including us?" He smirked. "Including us. We're outsiders here. Not exactly part of the crew, not exactly part of the passenger crowd. Perfect for noticing things." She didn't respond. Instead, she pointed toward the upper decks where Tanya Jorgen was speaking animatedly with Millicent Jones. Both women looked furious, or perhaps they were performing for someone's amusement. Jiggs couldn't tell which. By late morning, the ship's spa reported something unusual. "Cabin 1021, sauna, unresponsive occupant," said the spa manager nervously to security. Jiggs and Sarah arrived quickly. Inside the sauna, the heat was almost unbearable, but the detective's eyes were drawn to the body slumped across the wooden benches. George Williams, the psychiatrist, lay motionless. His hand clutched a towel, face pale. His breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. Sarah checked his pulse. "Dead," she confirmed quietly. Jiggs surveyed the room. Steam clung to the corners, but there were no signs of struggle, no overturned items. The sauna door was locked from the outside. "Someone wanted this to look like an accident," Jiggs muttered. Sarah studied the walls. But the temperature gauge was tampered with. This wasn't a mistake. Jiggs nodded grimly. "We have a killer who knows their way around the ship, and they're bold. That's 3 now." News of the second murder spread quickly. Passengers whispered in the hallways. Some locked themselves in cabins. Others demanded lifeboat drills or immediate docking. The captain attempted a calm announcement over the intercom. "Attention passengers, please remain calm. Security is handling a minor incident. Normal activities will resume shortly." It did nothing to calm anyone. Meanwhile, Detective Jiggs began piecing together the emerging pattern. Night 1, Edward Longstreet disappears overboard. Night 2, Phil Jacobson, stabbed in his cabin. Night 3, George Williams, found dead in a locked sauna. 3 very different deaths, 3 very different methods. Sarah sighed. "Our killer's sending a message. They're taunting us." Jiggs nodded. "And they're still on the ship, walking among us." The detectives started digging deeper into the passenger's past. Millicent Jones, widow with immense wealth, often rubbed other passengers the wrong way with her arrogance. But could she kill? Tanya Jorgen, desperate to secure a husband. Could jealousy or rejection push her to murder? Kenny Alexander, young steward. Financial troubles. Messages from unknown people threatening him. Could he be coerced into violence? Jim Ratt, retired footballer. Big personality, but no known enemies, or so it seemed. Jiggs observed the social interactions closely. Patterns began to emerge. Phil Jacobson had argued with Millicent the previous evening. George Williams had been seen in a private conversation with Kenny. Tanya had been flirting with Phil. Every death connected, directly or indirectly, to at least one other passenger. "This isn't random," Jiggs whispered. "It's targeted. Someone on board has a list." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "And what's next? Who's on it?" By afternoon, a small envelope appeared in the detective's cabin. No sender, no fingerprint. Inside, "Stop looking, or you'll be next." Jiggs held it up. Sarah's face was pale. "This is escalating," she said. "They're not just killing passengers, they're taunting us." Jiggs crumpled the note slightly. "Exactly. And that means they're watching everything we do." Sarah looked out the window at the calm Atlantic. 7 days, 6 deaths, only 3 left. He nodded grimly. "We need to identify the killer before the next nightfall, or we're running out of time." The ship approached Bermuda for its brief daytime docking. Passengers were allowed to disembark for a few hours. Some took taxis or tours. Detectives Jiggs and Sarah decided to remain on board. Too risky to split focus. Meanwhile, Millicent Jones used the stop to host a luncheon for the passengers she considered important. She invited Tanya Jorgen, Jim Ratt, and a few others. Jiggs observed from the deck. Millicent's control over her little social circle was impressive. Every gesture, every glance measured. But he also noticed something else.
a subtle tension between her and Kenny Alexander, who had been assigned to serve her table. "Something's off," he muttered. Sarah nodded. "Everything's off." Back in the crew corridors, Kenny Alexander's anxiety was growing. The anonymous messages continued. Threats, warnings, even hints that someone was watching him constantly. He tried to speak with security but could not reveal the nature of the threats without exposing himself. The young steward realized, painfully, that he was now a person of interest in the deaths, and the killer knew it. Someone wanted him to fail, or worse, wanted to frame him. As night fell, the ship's corridors were eerily quiet. Jiggs and Sarah made a final sweep of decks 9 through 12, every tub unlocked, every corridor monitored. Then they noticed a small pool of blood behind a service door near the theater. They opened it, empty, only a single wet handprint on the wall. She whispered, "They're daring us now." Jiggs stared at the handprint, and soon, he said, "There'll be another body." In the chaos, almost everyone on board became a suspect. Tanya Jorgen argued publicly with Millicent over seating arrangements. Jim Ratt was overheard threatening to push someone from bumping into him. Millicent Jones was seen whispering to George Williams the day before his death. Kenny Alexander was spotted lingering near several cabins late at night. Passengers began whispering. Fear gripped the halls. Sarah noted the pattern. Every suspect has a motive, but only one killer can pull this off. Jiggs frowned. And they're patient. That's the dangerous part. High above the decks, hidden in the shadows, the killer smiled. The detectives had noticed some patterns, but not all. 3 victims down, 3 to go. By the time the Star of the Sea returned to Boston, 6 passengers would be dead, and the killer would be gone, or standing among the survivors, smiling politely, as if nothing had happened.
And before the Star of the Sea returned to Boston, the final act would begin.
By the 4th day of the voyage, the mood aboard the Star of the Sea had changed completely. The music still played near the pool, the casino lights still flashed, but the laughter was gone. Passengers whispered in corners, constantly glancing over their shoulders. 3 deaths in 3 days had transformed a luxury cruise into something far darker. Detective Jiggs Williams leaned against the railing on Deck 10, watching the ocean pass by. Sarah Meechan approached, holding a tablet filled with passenger records. "You were right," she said quietly. "About what?" "These people are connected." Jiggs turned. "Let's hear it." Sarah tapped the screen. Phil Jacobson, George Williams, Edward Longstreet. "Yeah?" "They all had financial dealings together 10 years ago." Jiggs frowned. "What kind of dealings?" Sarah looked up. "A company called North Atlantic Biotech." Inside the ship's small conference room, the detectives spread files across a table. Sarah explained. 10 years ago, North Atlantic Biotech collapsed after a massive fraud investigation. Jiggs listened carefully. Executives lied about clinical trial results, investors lost billions. "Who went to prison?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "Almost nobody." She pointed to names on the report. Phil Jacobson, early investor. George Williams, psychological consultant. Edward Longstreet, security investigator. Millicent Jones, major shareholder. Jim Ratt, celebrity endorser. Tanya Jorgen, marketing consultant. Jiggs leaned back slowly. "They all work together." Sarah nodded. "And now they're all on the same cruise ship." He stared at the list. "And 3 of them are already dead." The detectives walked the promenade deck deep in thought. "Someone connected to the scandal," Sarah said. "Someone who lost money, or someone whose life was ruined." Jiggs nodded. "Revenge." Sarah stopped walking. "Then who's next?" They both looked down at the list. Millicent Jones, Jim Ratt, Tanya Jorgen, Kenny Alexander. 4 people left. 3 murders remaining. Jim Ratt's problem. Inside the ship's sports bar, Jim Ratt slammed his beer onto the table. "I'm telling you," the former footballer growled. "This whole thing is insane." 2 passengers beside him nodded nervously. "I'm staying in my cabin tonight," one said. Jim shook his head. "Not me. I didn't do anything wrong." But his voice lacked confidence. Because deep down, he knew the truth. North Atlantic Biotech had been a lie. He had promoted their miracle treatment on television. Thousands of investors trusted him. And when the company collapsed, people lost everything. A warning. Later that evening, a note appeared under Jim Ratt's cabin door. He picked it up casually. Then his face turned pale. The message read, 4 remain. Jim dropped the note. Someone knocked on the door. He hesitated, then slowly opened it. No one was there. Just an empty hallway. That night, the ship hosted a comedy show in the main theater. Hundreds of passengers attended. Jiggs and Sarah sat near the back, watching the crowd more than the stage. Sarah whispered, "If the killer wants attention, this is the perfect place." Jiggs nodded. Too many witnesses, though. Suddenly someone screamed. The lights flickered. A man collapsed near the front row. Passengers rushed away in panic. Jiggs and Sarah sprinted forward. The man on the floor wasn't moving. It was Jim Ratt. A dart protruded from his neck. The shift doctor arrived seconds later. He checked the pulse, then shook his head. Poison. The theater erupted in panic. Passengers rushed toward exits. Security tried to control the crowd. Jiggs studied the dart. Small, professional. Sarah whispered, "Blowgun?" "Looks like it."
She looked around the packed theater. The killer fired this in front of hundreds of people. Jiggs nodded and disappeared in the crowd. Only 3 left. Back in the security office, the detective stared at the board. Victims: Edward Longstreet, pushed overboard. Phil Jacobson, stabbed. George Williams, heat poisoning. Jim Ratt, poison dart. Sarah crossed his name off the list. 4 down. Jiggs looked at the remaining names. Millicent Jones, Tanya Jorgen, Kenny Alexander. 3 people left, 2 murders remaining. Kenny's secret. Down in the crew corridors, Kenny Alexander paced nervously. He couldn't take it anymore. The threats, the messages, the deaths. Finally, he went to find the detectives. He knocked on their cabin door. Jiggs opened it. Kenny looked terrified. "I need to tell you something." Sarah gestured inside. "Sit down." Kenny swallowed. 10 years ago, my father invested everything in North Atlantic Biotech. Sarah listened closely. "He lost everything," Kenny continued. "Our house, our savings, everything." Jiggs frowned. "Your father's name?" Kenny hesitated. "Daniel Alexander." Sarah's eyes widened. She quickly checked the report. Daniel Alexander, lead scientist, whistleblower, the man who exposed the fraud, and who later killed himself. Jiggs stared at Kenny. "You think someone is avenging your father?" Kenny nodded slowly. "All those people ruined his life," Sarah whispered. "But who's doing it?" Kenny looked just as confused. "I thought maybe you'd know." Jiggs leaned back. "Whoever it is, they've waited 10 years. Sarah looked at the board again. Millicent Jones, Tanya Jorgen, Kenny Alexander. 2 murders left. And suddenly, everyone on board seemed like a suspect. The killer watches again. High above the decks, the killer observed the detectives through binoculars. They were getting closer. Closer than expected. But the plan was already too far along to stop. 4 victims down, 2 remaining. And the most satisfying deaths were still to come.
A ship full of suspects. The Star of the Sea was now 4 days from Boston. 4 murders. Millicent Jones lived like royalty aboard the cruise liner. Her luxury suite on Deck 12 was larger than most apartments. Private balcony, grand piano, marble bathroom, expensive wine everywhere. When Jiggs and Sarah arrived, Millicent was sitting in a velvet chair near the window, calm, elegant, and completely unsurprised to see them. "I wondered when the detectives would visit," she said. Sarah stepped forward. "You knew the victims." Millicent gave a small smile. "Yes." Jiggs crossed his arms. "North Atlantic Biotech?" The widow's expression darkened slightly. "That unfortunate business venture." "Unfortunate?" Sarah said sharply. "Thousands of people lost their savings." Millicent sighed. "You think I didn't lose money too?" Jiggs studied her carefully. "Did you know Daniel Alexander?" For the first time, Millicent looked uncomfortable. "Yes," she admitted. "He was the scientist who betrayed us." Sarah's voice turned cold. "He exposed fraud." Millicent looked away. "Business can be complicated." That evening, the ocean was rough. Wind howled across the decks. Inside the ship, passengers remained mostly in their cabins. Jiggs had a bad feeling. Sarah noticed. "You think tonight's the night?" He nodded. "The killer is accelerating. 4 murders in 4 days. 2 left. Millicent Jones and Tanya Jorgen. One of them might be maxed." Despite the tension aboard the ship, Millicent Jones insisted on hosting a small private dinner in her suite. Wine, caviar, crystal glasses. 1 passenger missing, presumed dead. And somewhere aboard the massive cruise ship, a killer was calmly moving among thousands of frightened travelers. The captain had quietly canceled most evening events. Bars closed earlier. Security guards now patrolled every deck. But it was already too late. Detectives Jiggs Williams and Sarah Meechan stood inside the ship's security office, staring at a whiteboard filled with names. The list of the original North Atlantic Biotech investors was now half crossed out. Edward Longstreet, dead. Phil Jacobson, dead. George Williams, dead. Jim Ratt, dead. Remaining: Millicent Jones, Tanya Jorgen, Kenny Alexander. Sarah tapped the board. "The killer is finishing the list." Jiggs nodded. "Revenge. Daniel Alexander's revenge," Sarah said. "The whistleblower scientist who had exposed the fraud. The man who had lost everything. The man who later took his own life. His son, Kenny Alexander, now worked as a steward on the ship, which made him either a target or the killer. Despite the tension aboard the ship, Millicent Jones insisted on hosting a small private dinner in her suite. Wine, caviar, crystal glasses. The guest list was short. Tanya Jorgen, Kenny Alexander, serving drinks. 2 other wealthy passengers. The atmosphere was tense. Millicent raised a glass.
To surviving this dreadful voyage, Tanya laughed nervously. Kenny poured champagne, then quietly slipped away. An hour later, a scream echoed down deck 12. Security arrived first, then the detectives. The scene inside Millicent's suite was chaos. Guests panicked. A wine glass shattered on the floor, and on the balcony, Millicent Jones lay motionless in a chair, her eyes open, a faint purple mark around her throat. Sarah knelt beside her. She's dead. Jiggs examined the balcony railing. No signs of struggle. No witnesses. Someone had strangled her silently during the dinner party, right under everyone's noses. An hour later, a scream echoed down deck 12. Security arrived first, then the detectives. The scene inside Millicent's suite was chaos. Guests panicked. A wine glass shattered on the floor, and on the balcony, Millicent Jones lay motionless in a chair, her eyes open, a faint purple mark around her throat. Sarah knelt beside her. She's dead. Jiggs examined a balcony railing. No signs of struggle. No witnesses. Someone had strangled her silently during the dinner party, right under everyone's noses. An hour later, a scream echoed down deck 12. Security arrived first, then the detectives. The scene inside Millicent's suite was chaos. Guests panicked. Guests panicked. A wine glass shattered on the floor, and on the balcony, Millicent Jones lay motionless in a chair, her eyes open, a faint purple mark around her throat. Sarah knelt beside her. She's dead. Jiggs examined the balcony railing. No signs of struggle. No witnesses. Someone had strangled her silently during the dinner party, right under everyone's noses. An hour later, a scream echoed down deck 12. Security arrived first, then the detectives. The scene inside Millicent's suite was chaos. Guests panicked. 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 Guests panicked.
The Star of the Sea had turned north. Boston was now less than 24 hours away, but the mood aboard the cruise ship felt nothing like the cheerful departure 7 days earlier. Passengers stayed in their cabins. The casino sat nearly empty. Security officers stood at every stairwell and elevator bank. 5 people were dead, and the killer was still somewhere on the ship. Detective Jiggs Williams stood in the observation lounge, staring at the dark Atlantic. Sarah Meechan joined him, carrying a folder. "You're quiet," she said. Jiggs nodded, thinking. About Tanya? About the plan. Sarah sat across from him. If she's Daniel Alexander's daughter, she had motive. Jiggs rubbed his chin. She also had opportunity. Phil Jacobson? She was drinking with him that night. George Williams? She used the spa earlier that day. Jim Ratt? She was in the theater audience. Sarah sighed. And Millicent Jones. She was invited to the dinner party. Everything lined up. Almost too perfectly. Sarah looked uneasy. You think it's a setup? Meanwhile, Kenny Alexander sat alone in the crew lounge. He hadn't slept in 2 days. 5 people were dead, and he knew every one of them had been connected to the company that destroyed his father's life. The same company that left Daniel Alexander bankrupt and broken. Kenny stared at the old photo on his phone, his father smiling in a lab coat. A brilliant scientist. A good man. And someone the world had forgotten. Kenny whispered quietly, I hope whoever's doing this stops. He didn't realize someone was standing behind him, watching. Back in their cabin, Jiggs and Sarah finalized a plan. If Tanya really is the killer, Sarah said, she'll go after Kenny tonight. Jiggs nodded. He's the last name on the list, so we protect him. And wait. Sarah checked her watch. The ship reaches Boston in the morning, which means tonight is her last chance. Jiggs loaded his service pistol. Let's catch a killer. Late that night, Kenny returned to his cabin. He opened the door and froze. Tanya Jorgen sat quietly on the chair by the window. Kenny, she said softly. His eyes widened. How did you get in here? I used a spare key. Kenny frowned. What do you want? Tanya looked at him with sadness. You don't recognize me, do you? He shook his head slowly. No. Tanya took a deep breath. My real name is Tanya Alexander. Kenny's world tilted. My father was Daniel Alexander, she finished. The steward stared at her in shock. My sister? Tanya noted. Yes. Kenny sank onto the bed. Dad told me you died. Tanya's eyes filled with anger. Dad didn't know where I went. What happened?
She looked away. After the company collapsed, I disappeared. Why? Because those people ruined our lives. Her voice hardened. Every one of them deserved what happened. Kenny stared at her. You killed them? Tanya didn't answer, but the silence said everything. Outside the cabin door, Jiggs and Sarah waited quietly. They had placed Kenny under watch hours earlier. Now they heard voices inside. Sarah whispered, "That's her." Jiggs nodded. "Let's end this." He pushed the door open. "Tanya Alexander," he said calmly. "Step away from him." Tanya turned slowly. Her expression wasn't panicked. It was calm. Too calm. Kenny looked between them. "What's happening?" Jiggs kept his gun steady. "You're under arrest for 5 counts of murder." Tanya smiled faintly. 5? Sarah frowned. "What?" Tanya looked directly at them. "I only killed 3. The room went silent. Jiggs blinked. "Which 3? George Williams, Jim Ratt, Mellison Jones." Sarah's voice dropped. "Then who killed the others?" Tanya slowly pointed toward Kenny. Kenny stood frozen. "What?" Tanya's voice trembled. "I followed you onto the ship because I knew what you were planning." Sarah looked confused. "Planning what?" Tanya spoke quietly. "Kenny killed Phil Jacobson." Kenny shook his head wildly. "No!" And he pushed Edward Longstreet overboard. The room felt suddenly smaller. Jiggs slowly turned toward the steward. "Is that true?" Kenny's breathing became heavy. "You don't understand." Kenny collapsed into the chair. "They destroyed our father." His voice cracked. "Longstreet knew the fraud and covered it up. Jacobson funded it." Sarah whispered, "So you killed them?" Kenny nodded weakly. "Yes, but Tanya..." He looked at his sister. "You started killing people too." Her eyes burned with rage. "They deserved it." Jiggs lowered his gun slightly. "So this whole cruise was 2 revenge killers working separately?" Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "You didn't even know about each other's murders." Tanya looked at Kenny sadly. "We both came here for the same reason." Ship security rushed into the cabin moments later. Jiggs handed over the weapons. Sarah placed cuffs on Tanya. Another officer cuffed Kenny. 2 killers. 6 victims. 1 twisted revenge story 10 years in the making. As they were led away, Tanya looked back at her brother. "I wish we had talked sooner." Kenny nodded slowly. Maybe none of this wouldn't have happened. The next morning, the Star of the Sea entered Boston Harbor. Police boats surrounded the cruise liner. News helicopters circled overhead. Passengers watched from the railings as Tanya Alexander and Kenny Alexander were escorted down the gangway in handcuffs. 6 murders solved, 2 killers caught, and 1 cruise voyage that no passenger would ever forget. Later that afternoon, Jiggs and Sarah sat in a quiet Boston bar. Sarah raised a glass. "To the worst vacation ever." Jiggs laughed. "Next year? No cruise ships," Sarah said. "Deal." Outside, the Atlantic wind blew cold across the harbor. And far out beyond the horizon, the ocean swallowed the memory of 6 violent deaths aboard the Star of the Sea.